The Ontario Liberals are promising to slash transit fares to $1 per ride across the province if elected this June. The plan would apply to all municipal lines, GO Transit and Ontario Northland Service, and would be in place for 2 years. The party estimates this will cost about $710 million this year and about $1.1 billion in 2023-2024. The Liberals saying the province would cover that lost revenue. For reaction, we welcome back to CP24 Tonight Shelagh Pizey-Allen, the Executive Director of TTC Riders, and Matti, Siemiatycki, Professor of Geography and Planning at the University of Toronto and Director of the Infrastructure Institute. Thanks to both of you for joining us. Shelagh, let's start with you. Under this plan, someone hopping on the GO train from Oakville to Toronto would save about $20 on a round trip. A commuter taking the GO from Whitby to Toronto would save about $300 a month. So with inflation rising at record highs, how much of an incentive is this plan? Will this, in your opinion, actually boost ridership?
We're really glad that transit affordability is on the agenda. Because many transit users in Toronto cannot afford to pay the fare, and transit is a right. You know, it unlocks our access to education, to jobs, to groceries, to healthcare. Affordability is really important, but it is just one part of the equation when it comes to attracting new riders to the system. We also need more frequent service, more reliable service. So it's really that long-term operations funding that's so important to boost service as well. And we did see the Liberals make a pledge for the first time to invest in transit operations funding. Our question is that $375 million a year they're planning for operations, is that really going to be enough to protect transit from the cuts that are on the horizon because of lower pandemic ridership? The Greens and NDP have actually pledged to invest 50% of transit operating costs. We do have questions whether it will be enough, but we're glad that affordability is on the agenda.
Yeah, it's all about the money. Professor Siemiatycki, this plan is expensive. With ridership down in just the last few years during the pandemic and transit infrastructure aging, can we even afford this?
Well, the money is a big part of this story, and whether we can afford investments in all of the big infrastructure. You know, during the pandemic, governments spent heavily to keep people safe, to keep the economy going. Coming out of the pandemic, they're now talking about recovery spending. We need to be very aware of how we're going to pay for all of this investment. All of it has been done on debt and deficits, and so how we pay for this spending is important. This new announcement does feel a bit gimmicky. Buck a ride province-wide. That feels a little bit like what you hear on the Midway at an amusement park. And we need to make sure that these are well conceived, well implemented, and that there's a full budget accounting to be able to pay for them.
So Shelagh, you mentioned this, there are other factors that impact ridership and attract people. Can you speak about how riders are feeling right now? You know, are people feeling a bit hesitant to go back to taking transit given where we're at in the pandemic? And also we've seen sort of a recent spike in criminal activity on transit.
That's right. You know, we do think it's really important to be doing everything we can to win back riders, and not just win back riders to pre-pandemic levels, but increase ridership to meet our climate goals. And it does start with more frequent, more reliable service and affordable fares. And, you know, safety is a really broad conversation. One of the top safety concerns we've heard throughout the pandemic is bus crowding. That's why we need more frequent service. The other is distributing masks on public transit. That's also an operating funding question. And I think this is about recovery of transit ridership in the long term. So if this is just a discount for 1.5 years and then fares skyrocket after, that's a cost being borne by transit riders. We really need to fix the whole transit funding model. It's not right for most of the budget to be paid for by rider fares.
Right. So, Professor Siemiatycki, is there a point in introducing a plan like this if we don't really know what's going to happen 2 years later with those fare prices?
I actually think this is an important step to attract people back to transit. Transit ridership has been way down through the pandemic, down as much as 90%, and the people still riding transit were those who were very much in need. Low-income riders, racialized riders, newcomers, often in the inner suburbs. We need to be making sure that we're providing adequate service, especially on the buses where ridership remained high, even as overall transit ridership dropped. And then we need to make sure that these programs are sustainable so that they can be paid for and implemented over the long term. 1.5 years is a short increment of time in the legacy of a transit system, which lasts for decades and centuries. We need to make sure that this system is sustainable long term.
So Shelagh, do you agree with that sentiment of even if it's just immediate relief, it will help?
Yeah, transit riders do need relief. I mean, people are struggling to pay their transit fare. And it's true that the people who have been relying on transit the most are working class people, racialized residents, people who are more likely to have a disability, earn lower incomes. Transit riders do need relief. But we also need, a plan for the long term. We need to both lower fares and increase service. So that's why TTC Riders is calling on all parties to invest in transit operations funding. We're actually having a rally this Saturday in Scarborough to also call on, a plan for Scarborough, better bus service in Scarborough when the RT shuts down in 2023. So it's really all about the long-term investment in operating funding, but we see lower fares and better service as the key.
Okay, we'll have to leave the conversation there for today. But again, we're a month away from the election, so we'll find out very soon whether this will go forward. Shelagh Pizey-Allen and Matti Siemiatycki, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.